What's up everyone, welcome back to Workshop Rebuild. In today's episode, I'll be working on this axle from a John Deere 300 series garden tractor, so stay tuned. This axle that I have in front of me on the table over here came off a John Deere 317 specifically. I believe most of the John Deere 300 series garden tractors have the exact same axle and transaxle. What that means is the hydraulic motor and pump right here with the axle combined. That's as much as I know. So what I will be doing is tearing into this today. Everything seems to be very good looking at it from the outside, but I want to look at it internally and make sure that the seals on the outside here towards the shafts are still in good condition, that they don't leak any oil, and that the gears inside of here are still in good condition. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to be tearing into this axle and the housing right here so I can see what's going on inside. If I have to make any changes, I will do that. And in the end, I will have a perfect axle right here. And then possibly in an upcoming video, I will work on the hydrostatic motor and pump of this transaxle. So let's dig into it. After removing all 8 bolts from the housing over here, I can now move on to the right side and the left side of the axle and pull them out after I release these 4 bolts so the differential inside is free, and then I can lift this part of the housing up and out. So right in front of me here, I have the differential and everything turns very smooth. The gears look to be in very good condition. Everything seems perfect. Everything is nice and tight and the way it should be. Sure, there is play from the rack to the ring gear, but that's normal. And it is a Dana differential. So that's very interesting. So that means it's pretty heavy duty and a quality differential. Looking in the housing over here, I have some debris from the gasket material right here. I will have to replace it since it ripped up on me, but that's no problem. I'll just have to get the right thickness of gasket material and I'll cut my own gasket right here to replace that one. I will replace the oil level line right here. So this little piece right here and this piece right here, I will be replacing so it's more visible. And moving on forward, right in this bore over here, or basically in there, we have a seal. That's located right here somewhere. I'm gonna have to check if those seals are still good right here and on the other side. If they are still good, I'll leave them the way they are. The axles themselves seem to be very dry up front, and if there is a little bit of residue right here, it's from the grease that was packed on the bearings. The seal sits somewhere in this area right here. So I'm wondering now that these bearings right here would have to be taken out to service them or to lube them up again. As you can see, there's quite a bit of grease right here and there's not much on the bearing itself. So that's not really a nice thing to see, but I guess you should take them out every now and then and apply a little bit of new grease onto those bearings. But what I will be doing is cleaning them up and packing them with grease again once I put the shaft back in. Moving on to the other side, the other one looks exactly the same. It doesn't look like any oil was moving past this bearing since it's very dry here, or there's just a little bit of grease. And the same thing on this side, the bearing looks a little bit dry. So I will be cleaning everything up right here, especially on the bottom half of the housing, and I will be taking off the level tube or the sight tube right here, and I will be replacing that. And then I have to go to town and see if I can grab a thin piece of gasket material for the gasket. Other than that, I'm going to be tuning in once everything is clean. So it's been a couple days since I last worked on the differential and the axle for the John Deere 317. Internally, everything is cleaned up, and externally there still is a little bit of grime, but that won't harm the assembly of this differential. Moving on to the axle, everything is clean over here where the seals are and the bearings. Up front I have the bolts and some nuts over here which are also very clean. On my right over here I have a new gasket which I cut out myself. I made this little template from paper and worked out perfectly fine. The dimensions are right and the thickness of the cardboard works. And I'm going to be using a UTV sealant to seal that as well, so there won't be any leaks in the near future. Over here I have a brand new hose for the oil level. The old one was just too hard and I noticed it was cracked as well, so it's always good to replace that. And this one is clear, so I'll see the oil level much better. Moving on to the rectangular gasket that came off of this cover over here. I will be replacing it with just regular UTV sealant, so I will not need a gasket for that. It's just to service the gear and or to take it apart. So there's no real function for that. There is no distance that has to be kept or anything like that. So it's just to hold in oil. So I shared with you guys what I did so far, and I'll give you guys an in-depth view on this and how I assemble it, and hopefully what I I got all 8 bolts tightened down on the differential and both halves are together. Everything went super smooth. The sealant is drying up on the side right now and the gasket is sticking out a bit. After everything is dry, I can just cut it off with a razor and then it will be flush. Now, since that can dry, I'm looking forward to install the axles right here and the bearing race over here. I'm gonna double check if that's very good, that there's no damage in it. And the seal on the inside, I already checked and that is in perfect condition. So what I'm gonna do now before I install it, I'm gonna lube up the seal area in here first, and then I'm gonna go ahead and pack the bearings so I can insert them into the differential. After that, I can mount the bolts on the outside right here, which hold the axles in place. So let's move on to that. Next up, I can install the axles right here, and as I took them out, I made sure that the right side stays on the right and the left stays on the left. So this shaft and this bearing came out of this side, and that's very important because this bearing was ground to perfection with this bearing race inside. So you don't want to mix them up. There shouldn't be a big issue if you would, but it's better to just keep them the way they came out. So now, since I added grease onto the seal inside, I can slowly push this in, making sure that I don't damage anything as I push it in. And just like that, now the bigger diameter is past the seal. And once I go deeper in, I'm going to have to turn this shaft possibly to align the spline inside the differential. Now I can feel the differential. And now I want to start spinning, and right there, that is in. Now before I push too far, I want to pack this bearing right here. And I notice a slight issue on this design. Once this bearing is pushed into the bearing race and the shaft is inside of the differential, there's no way to grease this bearing or service it. So what that means is there is no grease nipple around here, and up front we have this plate which holds the bearing in place. On this plate there is nothing to service either. So now the question is, if you are using this over a longer period, let's say this tractor will have 1,000 hours or 1,500 hours, that would be a time to pull this cover off, pull the shaft out without taking the differential apart, just pulling it apart and greasing this bearing, because if this is packed with a certain amount of grease, that grease will push out to the right and to the left over time. And now what happens, your bearing doesn't have any grease anymore and it's just spinning metal on metal, and you want to have that grease in there to lube that up. And I did clean it up now, but I will manage to get enough grease in there that it will prolong the lifetime of this bearing right here, since it's in very good condition, and I hope it'll last still a very, very long time. Next up on the axle, I will be installing the spacer, and in between the spacer, it's really important you need a gasket. This gasket right here will adjust your preload on the bearing for the outer race. The outer race has this special ring right here, and once you tighten the bolts up to the bearing, it will give you a certain preload, and what that means is how much resistance your bearing will have, and that will give you a smoother ride. And every bearing has a specific preload, and I have this gasket right here. This is a shade thinner than what I had before, but if I add UTV sealant on both sides, it should be just fine. This measures in at 0.8 of a millimeter, and that I think is perfect. Over here on my left, I have the differential and the axles fully assembled. Everything went super smooth. Now the last step is to cut the oil level hose or the oil level tube to length, and I'll do that right here on this table, and then we'll install it, and then I can call this a complete assembly. So on the work table, I have a new hose over here which I will be cutting to length. I have 4 hose clamps which I will be reusing. These are the original ones. Over here I have 3 sections of hose that were previously on the differential. I have a hose which is a longer section, another hose which is a shorter section, and there was an inline filter, but I won't be using this or reusing it because it's not good anymore, and there is a filter in the hydraulic pump and motor, so I won't be using this inline filter. I will just be using a hose. So this section right here measures 30 centimeters, this measures 5 centimeters, and this measures another 5. Altogether I have 40 centimeters. So from this right here, I will be cutting 40 centimeters. For that I will just be using a tape. I'm going to lay it out on the table, grab a X-Acto knife, and I will cut this to length right here. It's nothing too special, just put your finger where the mark has to be and cut it to length. And just like that, I have a clean cut. Now, since this is cut to length, right here I can go and install this. As I said, this is 40 centimeters right here. I will leave the conversion up above so you guys will know what it is in inches, and I will be reusing these 4 hose clamps, so I'll show you where this goes. So on the differential we have a fitting over here, and further down, which is right here, we have another fitting. For that I will be using or reusing 2 of the hose clamps. I intended to use 4, but since I do not have an inline filter for this hose, I will only be using 2 on each end, 1 on the bottom and 1 on the top. Even put them on the hose, and just like that I will add it onto the fitting, and with a pair of pliers I will open this up to put the hose clamp over the fitting, making sure that it's nice and snug and that doesn't go anywhere. The last step for the oil level hose or the oil level tube is to grab on it and pull it through this cavity right here. There is an oval cavity which the tube should fit through. You can pull it out a little bit, but not too much that it kinks itself. So you're going to want it just flush right here, and that should stay in place so you have your proper oil level right here. I finished the assembly on the differential and the axles, and everything is in place, even the oil level tube, and I'm super satisfied with the outcome. One thing I didn't show you guys, and I will show you guys that right now, I'm gonna take a pin right here, and what's really important on this differential is that you guys have the right preload on these bearings right here. So when you guys tighten it up, you don't want it too tight. If those shims aren't right, you're gonna have too much strain on the bearing, which will mean you're gonna have a certain amount of power loss within the differential. So when you take that pin, make sure you guys can just turn this over with one finger right here, just like this. If you can't do it with one finger, you're gonna have too much preload or not enough preload on your bearings, So that's going to be a wrap for today on this differential and the axle assembly. I hope you guys learned something, and if you do like this video, please leave a like down below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned.